Good morning, church. Do this. If you have a Bible or phone or tablet with you, we're going to be spending some time in Luke chapter 1 this morning. We'll be jumping around some, but I'll tell you where to go so you can keep up. As Pat has mentioned already this morning, my name is Kevin Harrington-Bain. I get to work with our 6th through 12th graders. This is kind of my home zone over here, and I need them this morning, I'll tell you what. This is not what I usually do, but I'm glad to get to do it with family. We are in the midst of an Advent season. That means it's a season of expectation, of anticipation, and an invitation into just one last word that ends with "ation," an invitation into imagination, right? That's something that we have talked about last week as we find ourselves going through these themes of hope and love, joy and peace, all with the expectation of Jesus's, I lied, one more Asian word, Jesus's incarnation into the world, God becoming one of us, God being Emmanuel. And this week, we get to talk about love, which, if we're going to talk about one thing that has to do with Jesus, with God, love is a pretty great place to start. But that comes with some risks, right? That comes with the idea of, we talk about love all the time. We talk about Jesus all the time. What is there really to imagine, right? And every time I think about imagination, I think about some of my time spent at ACU whenever I was but a wee Bible major, just trying to find my way, trying to figure some things out. And I was in my second year Greek class. And I know some of you, if your reaction to second year Greek is, oh, well, you are not alone. But it was required and it's good. It was beneficial. I'm ultimately glad I did it, especially because my professor, Trevor Thompson, is one of my favorite people who I've ever met. He is a tall guy, at least compared to me, who's of profoundly average height. He's about 6'6". He's got this big, robust voice. He actually does a lot of voiceover work. Check if you're into audiobooks. Check if Trevor Thompson narrated your audiobook. And he's very straight-laced, a very dry sense of humor whenever his sense of humor actually made an appearance, which was semi-rare. But he had these catchphrases. One of them, he ended every class with, "Go take care of yourselves and others." And you hear that voice, and you're like, oh, that seems okay. It seems almost like a command, right? Go or else. But it became very pastoral. It became, this is Trevor taking care of us, even though the class is very much, you're sitting down, you're translating Greek. I got to do this class with my best friend Dylan, and so each week, or each class period, I should say, the way that class went was just very cut and dry. It was very black and white. We would go home or go to our dorm and sit down with our Greek New Testament, and our assignment was we would have a big chunk of text in Greek, this language that we didn't speak, barely read, and would translate. One of our favorites was the entire book of Philemon. He told us, go translate Philemon. And we said, yeah, which part? And he said, Philemon. And we said, uh-oh. And so we go, and we would translate from Greek to English, and then we would come back into class, and he would put people basically in the hot seat, and they would present their translation, and we would kind of unpack that together, and he would pick apart, okay, yeah, that's a good translation there, or what would that mean if you think about this word that's next to it? And it was all just very black and white, right? And one day, though, he pulled out one of these catchphrases whenever my friend Dylan was being the one to translate, and it became a theme throughout the rest of the class, because Dylan, was translating, and he says, to run the race, this, and then Trevor stops him and he says, hold on, what is that word there? He said, to run, and he says, okay, yeah, but what would that mean? Color your world, Edward. Dylan's real name is Edward, you should know, and no one calls him that. And so Dylan hears, color your world, Edward, and he looks around, and he says, I have no idea what that means. You said that like I should know what you mean by color your world. And he says, well, think about it this way, right? Those words are not in the language that we speak, but the people who wrote them, the people who would have first heard them or read them, it meant something to them, right? It's not just about these words that you can read in a dictionary. We're not just sitting down with a dictionary and saying, oh, well, this means to run, this means church, this means people, this means friend. But there's a whole world behind the people who were first saying this, who were first hearing it. So color your world. This is not as black and white as it would seem. We might think that we know the story, especially around Christmas time when we talk about Jesus coming into the world. This is a story we've heard a lot, and yet we have the invitation to color our worlds, right? To imagine what is behind there, the depth not only of the story, but the depth of the love of the God who tells that story. We've been going through Advent in student ministry, and last week we talked about hope, and it's all been student-led. It's a really, really beautiful thing. It teaches me a whole lot. And last week, the student who was teaching believed that he made a mistake and corrected himself. He started talking about the Advent season, except for he slipped up a little bit, and he said the Advent season. And then he said, oh, I'm sorry, season, to which our high school teacher promptly reminded him, actually, no, you nailed it. This is appropriately an Advent season. After all, I don't know if you knew this, but Jesus' mother was a woman. And if it were not for voices like Mary and Elizabeth, these female voices, there is in fact no gospel story. There is no story of Advent. And so this morning, you find yourself in a position to accept this invitation into imagination and to be led into this Advent season by the imagined voice of one of those women. So may we be attentive to our being led in imagination this morning.
I am a descendant of the daughters of Aaron. All of my mother's lullabies were psalms. All of my father's bedtime stories, they were from Exodus. Before I was 5, I could recite the commandments that were given to Moses on Sinai. Every year, alongside my mother, I would prepare our home for Seder by cleansing it of yeast. I sang the Purim songs to my younger siblings, and I was also allowed to play Esther in our family celebrations. I loved the traditions of our people, and I loved the one they pointed us toward. There was so much in my life to look forward to. I wanted all of it. I wanted to be a wife. I wanted to be a mother. I wanted to sing the Psalms to my own children. I wanted to train them in the traditions of our people. I wanted to watch them grow in love for the Holy One. My parents arranged my marriage to Zechariah, who is also of a priestly line, and it was a good match. Month after month, I expected to discover that I was pregnant. And month after month, I was disappointed. The double priestly line that we represent should have been carried on through our children, but I failed. I failed to produce a son. And now it's too late. I am too old to have children. To his credit, Zechariah, he was always kind and gentle with me. He never once accused me of secret sin that would prevent us from conceiving. No, instead, he would remind me of the stories of our people, the stories of Sarah and Hannah, who were barren for the Lord's purposes. My life is quiet and small. Mostly, I hide at home now so that I can avoid the judgment in people's eyes as they see my failure. Zechariah has been serving in the temple this month. In fact, he sent word that tonight he will be lighting the incense in the Holy of Holies. There is only one opportunity in a priest's lifetime to serve in this way. I have been praying for him here at home as he steps behind the curtain. He was much later arriving home than I had expected, and as he stepped into our modest home, I greeted him with his dinner, but his face was white. His eyes were round and huge, and I was alarmed and immediately asked him what was the matter. He opened his mouth to speak, and nothing. There was no sound, there were no words, there was nothing. And my alarm continued to grow. He took a deep breath, he took a drink, he looked at me, and he reached out for me and put his hands on my belly. What? What are you trying to tell me, Zechariah? Why won't you speak to me? And then, When no words will come out, still he starts to flap his arms next to him, and I think, he is truly crazy. It's not unheard of for priests to be changed when they've served in the Holy of Holies. Some of them have died. Some of them have lost their minds. Is this to be my Zechariah's fate? I settle him into our bed, hoping that sleep will find him and he'll wake up and be himself again. As I turn to leave the room, I feel him hold my arm, and when I turn back, his face is calm. His eyes are clear and they're focused. He takes one hand and cups it behind his ear, and the other points to himself. And then his arms flap again, and he lays his hands on my belly. Did you see something in the temple today, Zechariah? He nods, and then he flaps his arms again. You saw a bird? He shakes his head. You saw an angel? He nods. I feel weak. Zechariah, you heard from Elohim today? And he nods again. The Holy One has been silent for 400 years and breaks his silence today to my Zechariah. It's more than can be understood. But Zechariah interrupts my thoughts again by reaching out and laying his hands on my belly. You're hungry? He shakes his head. The angel said there's a famine coming. He shakes his head. He takes his arms and he forms a circle in front of my belly, and it grows out larger and rounder. There's a baby coming? He nods. A king? He shakes his head. He points to me. He puts his arms again around my belly, making it round and huge. I'm going to have a baby? He nods. A baby? A quiet tear falls down his face, but I am simply numb. In the days that follow, my heart and my head, they wrestle through this word. Could this even be real? Is this from God? Is my Zechariah crazy? Why in the world would we be chosen? Why now? I'm too old to have a baby. And then, one morning I woke up sick. Zechariah starts awake next to me, and he holds back my hair as my stomach is heaving. And when I'm able, I look up at him, and our faces are mirrors, eyes wide with wonder, and silent tears fall down our faces. I am pregnant with love. Love between Zechariah and myself, love between the Holy One and his people. Love itself has taken form and is growing inside of me. Adonai has done this for me. He has traded all of my shame for love.
It was just about a month ago. I'm pretty sure it was November 1st. I go over to my parents' house, and I'm pretty sure it's November 1st because I go through the front door, and there on the chair in the front room is still a bowl pretty much completely full of candy from the trick-or-treaters the night before, which, by the way, is an excellent strategy for those of you who know that there aren't a whole lot of kids in your neighborhood who will be coming by. You know, you should get some extra candy just in case, and then after October 31st is over, you get all that extra candy that I guess the kids just didn't show up for. But I walk through the door, and I go upstairs to visit my folks, and my mom is still in the recovery parts of her of a surgery she had undergone recently, and I walked through the door this day after Halloween, and she's sitting on the bed watching their TV, and I turned to see what is on the TV. And on November 1st, she is watching the Hallmark Channel, which is already showing their Christmas love stories. I mean, what a turnaround. It is, we haven't even started thinking about turkey yet. Okay, there's a whole holiday in between there, all right? It's not quite as bad as Hobby Lobby, who starts doing Christmas at like July, but it's close. And I can't say I'm surprised, and that's fine, but Hallmark has gotten really, really good about that, about taking the love stories that they show all the time, all those love movies, and then combining them with Christmas movies. I mean, really, what a bargain. That's a 2-for-1 situation. And they they start putting out all these movies, and we watch them, right? And depending on how you feel about them, that's good. But it also sets the tone for how we think about love stories and what they look like, especially around the holidays, right? And so I've got a couple examples, and before we get into this, I want to be clear. I am not here to yuck your yum this morning. If you are all about the Hallmark movies, more power to you, all right? I am a thorough believer in that you should like what you like, and if people try to put you to shame for that on a public forum, don't let them, okay? You like what you like, and that's all right. But this morning, I want us to take a look at Hallmark's vision of love and what that looks like, because it's the vision that we get a whole lot, especially around this time of the season. So I've done some of the research so that you don't have to. So the first one that we've got is A Joyous Christmas, which, if you look kind of closely at this poster, one, these are two exceptionally photogenic people in the middle of their decorating for the Christmas season. This is a theme for Hallmark, right? Kind of impossibly attractive people populate their movies. And also, I'm struck by the fact that there are lights already lit up. I've never seen two people happier to have a tangled knot of unlit Christmas lights. And I know that's what it looks like whenever I'm decorating. So, A Joyous Christmas. Yes, surely. Next, though, we have A Bramble House Christmas. Again, who is more ready? I know this is what we all look like when we are decorating our homes. Truly, they have a house full of children who make this just a joy to get through the efforts of setting up a Christmas story or your Christmas decorations. This one, I looked into the plot a little bit, and it is about a single mother and her son who also looks like he just stepped out of a JCPenney ad. And also, he asks permission before doing everything. It's amazing. Clearly, this is real life. And they want to get away together for the Christmas season, so they go to this lodge called Bramble House. And oh, wouldn't you know it, not everything goes according to plan. They were supposed to have it to themselves, but then the curator tells them, but there is one other guest. Is that going to be okay? And she's like, I don't know. And then in walks the most attractive man in the world, and suddenly it's okay. And so A Bramble House Christmas, the vision of love in the Christmas season. And then one more, similar to A Bramble House Christmas, Romance at Reindeer Lodge. I hope everyone here goes home and takes one ornament off your Christmas tree and then poses with it and then just puts it back so that people think that this is... But Romance at Reindeer Lodge is quite similar to a Bramble House Christmas. Also, bramble, not a word you ever hear. But the only difference is that the woman in Romance at Reindeer Lodge is not a mother. She is just someone who's trying to get away for the Christmas season. But her flight to Jamaica gets canceled and redirected to this picturesque lodge in Vermont. And so real people with real people problems, embodying the spirit of Christmas and love, right? But, I mean, and it feels good. And in fact, my mother-in-law just this morning commented on someone's post on Facebook who was like, is there a competition for the most ridiculous Christmas movie plot? And my mother-in-law goes, yeah, but I watch all those movies because I know they're going to have a happy ending, and I like that. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. And that's really how these love stories are presented to us, right? You have the impossibly attractive people who fill this world, who color this world. You have it take place in someone's hometown, which is just the perfect snowy little small town. Everybody knows each other. Everybody's ultimately conspiring to get the two main characters together. I mean, this takes place in a world where it is much more unthinkable that these two people are not going to be in love by the end of it than otherwise, right? Love here is not a daring exception. It is the kind of the status quo. It is the expectation. It is inevitable. And these are the stories that, they have happy endings. They have meet cutes, and we love it, and we eat it up. And Hallmark says, go for it. And the thing is that it is all designed that way for this world. And if this was the kind of love story that God told us in the Bible, then our story today would begin in Luke chapter 1, verse 39, when Mary visits Elizabeth. It says, "In those days Mary set out and went with haste to a Judean town in the hill country, where she entered the house of Zechariah and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the child leaped in her womb. And Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit and exclaimed with a loud cry, 'Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And why has this happened to me, that the mother of my Lord comes to me? For as soon as I heard the sound of your greeting, the child in my womb leaped for joy. And blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord.'" See, this is where the story would begin, right, if it were a Hallmark. I can see it now, right? Mary knocking on Elizabeth's door. There's a wreath there because we live in a world where even though this is part of the Christmas story, Christmas is already happening, right? So she knocks on the wreath door, and Elizabeth greets her and embraces her, and that what sounds like a very uncomfortable experience of a child leaping within her womb is more of like a, ooh, you see? Oh, what a wonderful encounter this is. And they embrace, and it's beautiful, and they sip cocoa by the fire. That could be where this story starts. That could be where it goes. But it is not. In fact, this is just skipping to that sweet, saccharine Hallmark ending. See, there's more than one way to tell this story. There's more than one way to tell a love story, and more than one kind of Christmas story. And so, in the midst of those Hallmark movies, I also think of this other Christmas movie you might be familiar with called A Nightmare Before Christmas. If you haven't seen it, the short and skinny is there's a guy named Jack Skellington. He is the king of Halloween. He is the pumpkin king. And then he discovers that Halloween is not the only holiday out there, and he discovers Christmas, and he becomes enamored with it, so he kidnaps Santa Claus and decides he's going to be Santa Claus, and basically ruins Christmas. It's like a happier version of the Grinch. So he goes through, though, and discovers the meaning of Christmas, right? And that's a bizarre thing, though. I mean, it came from Tim Burton, so that's to be expected. Tim Burton's a bizarre kind of guy. But we don't often think about nightmares before Christmas, about Christmas and love stories having to do with monsters. But see, this is a love story, and the fact is it doesn't start with Mary and Elizabeth. In fact, it starts in a very different kind of world, certainly different from the one that Hallmark would have us believe is the world where love and Christmas happens. You see, in those days is how that starts. You might have missed it. In those days when Mary goes to visit Elizabeth. But that's not the first time Luke has talked about in those days. In fact, that phrase brings us back to verse 5, where it says, "In those days when Herod was king of Judea." And right there we recognize that, this story is less Hallmark and more of a horror movie, right? Herod, we know, is kind of the villain of this Christmas story. He is king over Judea, and ultimately he is going to order the execution of children because he feels that his power, his status is threatened. And not only is he monstrous in that way, but he's also monstrous in what he represents. He was one of what was called a puppet king, which meant he was in charge, right? He was the king of Judea, but there were still people above him who had more power, right? People who later we'll meet, like Pontius Pilate and Caesar. These people who are the Roman Empire. And whenever the empire is in power, is in control, whenever that's their home, then we should look at our characters of Mary, Elizabeth, and Zechariah and know that the Jewish people, they are not at home. This is not your quaint, snowy hometown. No, this is the world of kings and power that is not yours. We also see that in those days, this is where Zechariah goes into the temple, right? That he goes into the holiest of holies. And whenever the angel Gabriel comes and speaks to him, he doesn't quite believe what he hears, and who could blame him? But this expression is taken as doubt, is taken as unbelief. And right then, right there, Zechariah is struck with a disability. His voice is literally taken away from him. He has become a mute. In the moment where he was supposed to be in the Holy of Holies, the closest you could be to God in the Jewish world, and now he has found himself in a position, he's been put in a position where he would actually be put on the outside, be put on the margins, because he didn't fulfill what was supposed to be the role of a priest. Of course, Elizabeth, right, her horror story looks similar to Zechariah. It's tied up in it. They both come from a priestly line. They are supposed to be people who are model citizens, Jews of Jews, right, the same way that Paul talks about himself. She is supposed to represent everything that a good Jewish woman is, and yet she cannot conceive a child. And so as far as the world around her is concerned, she was worthless for the function that she was good for, and it would be assumed that she was hiding some sort of sin, that, oh, Elizabeth must have done something really bad to bring this on. And so that was something that she bore. And Mary, of course, is a child chosen for an impossible circumstance, an impossible journey. She's of low status, and suddenly she's put at the center of this dangerous world around her with no prospects of having anyone else on her side, because after all, who would believe a woman about her personal life and what she says about her body versus what they see as so apparent? See, this horror movie is not run by your Freddy Kruegers or your Jason Voorhees or whatever. No, the story of this horror story, or the monster of this horror story, is called shame, and it has crept its way into the lives of everyone who's a part of this story. But what is shame? Brene Brown, a great theologian, knows, or she has proposed this definition of shame, that she defines shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Something that we've experienced, done, or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection. Unfortunately, just as love stories are familiar to us, so too is this monster called shame, because shame is not something that was just in those days. Shame is something that we experience here and now in these days. There's the shame of not being enough, of stepping back from your life and taking stock and finding something missing, feeling like there's something missing there. Maybe that something has to do with you. Maybe you are not enough. Or maybe you don't feel like you're able, right? In the immortal words of Coldplay in the song Fix You, when you try your best, but you don't succeed. These inabilities that we have, the ways that we find ourselves coming up short in a world that tells us that we are what we produce, we are what we do. And the message, whenever we don't meet that standard or don't believe that we do, or don't keep ourselves harried and busy to make sure that we can continue doing that, message then is shame. Shame, you need to be more. There's also the shame of not performing, which might seem strange, right? Performing not only the things that are demanded of us, but also this performing to see how everyone else seems to have it more together than you. There's a comedian who I love named Bo Burnham, and he talks about performing a lot, which seems to be like an appropriate thing for a comedian to do, right? But he talks about the irony of performance and how people are so drawn to performing in the facade, and let's not pretend like our church doors are immune to that, right? There are few more performative hours in many people's weeks than whenever we come through the doors here, where we're supposed to be okay, where we're supposed to talk about love, joy, hope, peace, all these things, and now I have to perform. Yeah, everything's fine. My life's kind of falling apart, but everything's fine. It's a performance. Bo Burnham also talks about how that's not just something that's person to person anymore, that the social media, the way that we connect with each other or say that we connect with each other just keeps that cycle going, right? And a lot of the time when we talk about social media, I think there's a temptation to believe that that only really pertains to the people over here, right? Our young people who are so tech obsessed, right? But if that's what you're thinking, I would challenge and invite you to take a look at your own Facebook, that we are now suddenly invited to become audience members in our own lives, right? We don't just have to tell people face to face, I'm okay, but we have to post the pictures, post the statuses, let people see what our lives are like so that people see, well, no, we're okay. I'm doing what I should. No reason to be ashamed here. And we call it connection. We call it connectedness when it is not. I wonder what that monster looks like for our characters, that monster called shame. Zechariah's shame of being a doubting priest, as if doubt is something that is forbidden. Elizabeth's shame for not being able to perform that one function that society told her that she was good for. Mary's fear of shame for what people might think, what people might believe, even her own fiancé, Joseph. And so this shame silences them. This is what shame does. It isolates, it makes us believe that we are alone and that no one can find out. It robs us of our voices, of our presence. It tells us that our story isn't one worth telling because it's not a story that's very good either. It's not one with a happy ending. And shame weighs down on you, bears down on your chest, and silences you. Each of these people in our story, Zechariah, Elizabeth, Mary, they are face to face with that monster. It seems impossible that they would not be weighed down, that they would not be swallowed up. That would seem impossible, and yet that is precisely what makes this a love story. Because love, after all, does the impossible. Love is an impossible thing. And, as it turns out, it was the story that God not only is telling, but has been telling since the start. Like Risa mentioned, God had been silent for 400 years up until this point. I was telling my high schoolers a couple weeks ago, 400 years, that's hard for us to get a grasp of. That's like if we opened our American history textbook and read about the Jamestown settlement in Virginia and then turned the page and it said, and then Barack Obama was elected the first African-American president of the United States of America. You're going to have some questions about what happened between Jamestown and that. First of all, what's the United States of America? Second of all, what's an African American? We don't have the second half of that either. That goes right in with the America problem. Two, what's the president? What is that all about? Right? There's a lot that's missing, and I hope that we can hear that as an invitation to indeed color our world, because there's a lot not only of history, of black and white facts, but a lot of life, a lot of people who lived life in that time. And so 400 years of silence is broken in the temple when God speaks to Zechariah through Gabriel. And yet the impossibility comes in that God's first words are then given to someone who in fact cannot speak. God makes a messenger out of the one who does not have a physical voice. So those who would find themselves on the margin, those who find themselves on the outside, who would look at what they are and aren't able to do, God takes God's message, God takes God's love and says, this is yours. Carry it into the world. This is God's impossible world, impossible love coming into the world. And there's Elizabeth, her impossibility, not just of the miracle of her conceiving when she could not before, but the miracle of what goes on from that one. She receives Zechariah's word. The man who cannot speak still communicates. She still receives that message, and there's a transformation that takes place in her. That her disgrace, that shame that she had felt, instead, God has done the impossible and transformed that into love. Like love takes the shame, takes the disgrace, and instead brings forth life. And then Mary, the impossibility of her shame, of being disconnected, of being alone in a scary and dangerous world that is not on her side. In fact, she finds community when she does go and knock on Elizabeth's door, and they say, what a wild life this is. Can you believe this, what God is doing? And no, I can't, because it seems impossible. But here we are, both together, experiencing it, doing what we can to faithfully deliver this love into the world. God does these impossible things, makes them real, and where shame's silenced, instead we see that love brings these voices forward. Voices that wouldn't have a chance of being heard or understood on their own. So, we need not worry about choosing love, about trying to conjure that up, about that being one more thing on the list of more that we have to do. Because love has already chosen us. Love has already done the impossible and changed what is or isn't possible for us, because it has been made real. You say, well, wow, Kevin, that sounds real nice. But buddy, you've been talking about impossibilities this whole time as if that can just be some quaint idea. No, I know. But that's also what makes last week so important. It takes hope And hope, again, is not just wishing for the ending that we would prefer. No, like we talked about, hope looks like waiting, being a people who wait, being a people who work toward what we hope for in the meantime, being a people who groan with that effort. After all, waiting, working, and groaning, it's no surprise that these are signals of the labor pains of an impossible thing being born into the world, an impossible thing like love. So, where in your life are you so sure that this thing in front of you is impossible? It might be a relationship. It might be wanting God to do one more impossible thing just for you because it hurts in the meantime. Maybe it looks like your own attitude. I'm not sure, but I think we could all agree that our life is full of seeming impossibilities, and yet love is already here. We came expecting love this morning. Love is an impossible thing, showing us that we don't know the first thing about what is and isn't possible, but we are to search for what is impossible, for what God is already making real, that we don't have to make that up for ourselves, but that we just have to find it and join it. Because God is doing impossible things in you, through you. Let love be that thing, and let it produce more of itself. And those who have ears to hear the word of God.